Welcome back, everybody, to the Enemy's Perspective, a UteNation podcast, where today we're discussing the return of the Utah-Wyoming matchup for the first time since 2010 with Ryan Thorburn. Ryan is the Director of Communications and Creative Strategy for Wyoming Athletics and the producer of the One Wyoming Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Stanley. So, Ryan, thanks for taking some time to talk ball with us today. Looking forward to it.
Good to be with you, Matt. Looking forward to the Utes coming back to Laramie.
Absolutely. So Wyoming started the season out 2-0 with big wins against Akron and Northern Iowa. So far, you've outscored opponents 41-7. Starting the season like this after last year's 3-9 record, how's the optimism feeling in Wyoming?
Yeah, it feels like a completely different team than last year. You know, obviously, Craig Bull was at Wyoming for a decade. He was Wyoming's longest tenured head coach in the history of the program. And, when Craig took over, Wyoming was kind of really down and he stabilized things. Consistent bowl team, won his share of bowl games, and really mastered the developmental program thing. Obviously, Josh Allen is the poster boy for that, but a lot of guys like Logan Wilson and other NFL guys came out of his program. So last year, Jay Sawvell took over, and it was rocky, like you mentioned, 3-9. I think Jay learned a lot from last year. Number one, this is a different era, so you have to really utilize the transfer portal to fill holes, and that's really what this team has done. It's a great mix this year of guys they've developed, like Caden Anderson, the quarterback, for example, and John Michael Gillenborg, the tight end, and really a lot of good leaders, have been high school recruits. Now they're juniors or seniors, but they had to fill a lot of holes through the transfer portal, and they've done that. And, they haven't played, Murderer's Row, obviously, with Akron and Northern Iowa, but it just looks different. They played 28 players on defense last week. Last year, I think the most they got up to was 17 or 18. So the depth is better because of the portal. And, Jay Sawvell is a lot like Craig Bull, but he's younger and more into this new era of football in college football.
Yeah, sometimes you just need that fresh perspective on things. So what's going to be the biggest thing that Wyoming needs to change this year to turn that 3-9 into a winning season and a bowl season?
Yeah, I think it's just balance. Last year they really struggled on defense because they relied on two safeties basically that had played 3 years of ball without ever getting hurt, without ever missing games. Those two guys were both injured against BYU of all teams 1 year ago exactly. And they had no one behind them. And then, after they lose to BYU, they go to North Texas, which is basically the number one passing team in the country. And it was just a nightmare from start to finish. They had injuries at defensive tackle. They had injuries on the offensive line. Harrison Whaley was the running back last year. He wasn't available at the beginning of the season. And John Michael Gillenborg, the tight end, was hurt at the beginning of the season. It just snowballed on them. And they could never really figure it out until the end of the season when some of those guys came back. So I just think the depth, like I mentioned with the portal, that's not going to be an issue right now. So they can stomach an injury here or there and be fine. And I just think Jay Sawvell learned so much last year. Obviously, Evan Svoboda was the quarterback. He dreamed of coming to Wyoming and being the next Josh Allen. It did not work out, but he's still on the team. He's a tight end now and really looks good at tight end. And I think Caden Anderson is the key. He's the quarterback this year. His story is very interesting. He was at South Lake Carroll, which is one of the major powerhouses in Texas, in Dallas. And, Quinn Ewers was the starter there, left high school a year early for Ohio State. And Caden all of a sudden took over that program and was being recruited by, high-level Big 12 teams and some other Texas teams, tore his ACL, and everyone backed off him. Wyoming said, we're sticking with you, but we want you to enroll early in the spring. So he came in early, rehabbed, and now a couple of years later, Wyoming has this really good prospect. So I think that's the key to turning it around. Obviously, quarterback, that's where it all starts. And Wyoming hasn't had any consistency there since Josh Allen left, and that was a long time ago.
Yeah, Caden Anderson looks pretty good so far. His first start, correct me if I'm wrong, was against New Mexico last year, who
That's
Devon
right.
Dampier was playing for, and he put up more than 40 points, correct?
Yeah, that's the interesting thing about this matchup is Wyoming is actually seen Dampier. A lot of teams are going to be caught off guard by how good this guy is. Very dynamic, as you know, dual threat guy. He really shredded Wyoming's defense last year. I think he was averaging, 9 yards a carry in that game, that shootout with New Mexico. But Caden Anderson, also lit up New Mexico's defense. Neither defense was good, obviously. But it was a really fun game. And it really it got Wyoming going a little bit. They won the game. It was a road game. The next week, they played Boise State, obviously a college football playoff team in Laramie. The final score was 17-13. I don't know what would have happened, but Caden got knocked out of that game in the second quarter with a concussion, and Evan Svoda had to come back in. And Wyoming fans will go to their grave saying Boise would not have been in the college football playoff if Caden would have finished that game out. So then they finished up at Washington State, and Caden was not available because that concussion, won 15-14. So you're looking at really, with those last two games, Boise State, Washington State, and the start of this year, 4 really good defensive efforts in a row after really being a sieve on that side of the ball for most of last year. So the defensive coordinator is Aaron Bull, Craig's son, and he's a young guy. He was first-time defensive coordinator. It took him a while to learn how to be a DC. So that's another big thing they have going this year is he has that experience under his belt, and he's, one of these talented 30-something coaches. He'll probably get a look at being a head coach someday somewhere.
Yeah, so it wasn't just Devon Dampier you got familiar with last year. It was his offensive coordinator, Jason Beck, who is also now at Utah. So with that being said, how do you expect Wyoming to attack Utah from a defensive standpoint?
Yeah, that's interesting. As I mentioned, Dampier was doing whatever he wanted to do in that game. And I think him and the coordinator probably learned a valuable lesson that, if they would have just stuck with running the ball, they probably would have won that game. But there was one play late in the game where, they tried to get cute and Dampier threw a pick 6. And that actually is, basically the reason why won that game. Because New Mexico was in control there. So I'm interested to see if Wyoming, who's really dramatically improved at linebacker from last year, the 2 starters, Evan Eller and Braden Johnson's actually, if you follow Pro Football Focus, through 2 games, he's number 2 in the country as far as being the highest graded linebacker. And Evan Eller is number 4 in the Mountain West. So those 2 guys weren't in the mix last year. Now they're the new starters. And Braden Johnson is actually one of these linebackers actually as big as Dampier. Like Dampier was bigger than Wyoming's linebackers last year. So I think, if I was Bull, I would try to figure out a way to limit Dampier's running game and make him beat you with the pass. Now, that sounds funny, obviously, because as you guys know, Utah – with Dampier and Utah's weapons, he's completed 80% of his passes. But last year, that's how Wyoming beat him, was when he made a mistake passing the ball.
Yeah, glad you brought that up because I do think this is Utah's toughest game so far this year. UCLA, I don't think ended up being all that much. This being a hostile environment, I think is the biggest test Utah's had in the out-of-conference schedule so far. You brought up Caden Anderson. Tell us a little bit about him. It's his first year as a starter, but he did start at least 3 games last year. What improvements do you think he made on the offseason this year that he's going to bring to the team this year?
Yeah, I think like I mentioned, his injuries in high school, which kind of led him to Wyoming. he hadn't played for football for a couple of years, as far as, being able to be hit and that sort of thing. And obviously starting a game for the first time since high school. So, I think a year ago, a lot of our fans were wondering, like, why is Evan Spoda not being yanked? Because he was struggling. And there was a variety of reasons why he was struggling. He didn't get any help. But Caden Anderson was, still rehabbing injuries. So I think he's healthier now. He's a team leader now. And he has really good rapport with the weapons. Chris Durr Jr., the wide receiver, and him are really good friends. John Michael Gillenborg is someone that, he knows he has to get the ball to now. And the running game is, off to a good start. So I just think he feels more comfortable, and this team is following him now, whereas last year he didn't think he would play last year. He was taking a back seat leadership-wise. So I think that's huge for Wyoming because he has kind of that quarterback it factor. He's a cool customer. He's very poised. I don't know if you saw the highlights from their game against Northern Iowa, but he was knocked out of the game in the third quarter with a just vicious blindside hit, or it wasn't even a blindside hit, a corner blitz that he did not see at all. Fortunately, he's going to be okay, and it looks like he's going to play in this game, but he's tough and he's unflappable. So I think he's, the straw that stirs the drink here, and we'll see how he does against an elite defense on Saturday night.
Perfect. That brings up to the next question. We already talked about defense. How do you think Wyoming's offense is going to attack Utah?
Well, I think they need to establish the running game, and Sam Scott so far is leading the Mountain West in rushing. And, he's a big guy. He started out at Wyoming as a linebacker, and they were actually headed to the 2022 Arizona Bowl. And you know how the portal works that time of year in December. Wyoming lost a couple running backs to the portal, had a couple running backs hurt. So Sam was a linebacker, but he played running back in high school. And Craig Bull said, "Hey, how do you feel about playing running back in this game?" And he's never looked back. He's a really good running back. And, they were able to lean on him at Akron, while they're working out the kinks of this offense. And he had 29 carries that night, 130 yards. He really wore down Akron. He's a big guy. But last week, Jay Savell said 29 carries is not sustainable for anyone other than Ashton Genty. So they got a couple other guys involved, including a freshman named Samuel Toad Harris from Texas, who Utah was one of the schools that recruited him. Just like the Caden Anderson story, he had an ACL in high school. Wyoming stuck with him. Some of the Power Fours didn't. And he is a really electric guy. So I would expect kind of the thunder and lightning with him and Sam and Tote. And, that's what they want to do to take some pressure off Caden. And if they can't establish the run against Utah, that could be really a nightmare.
Yeah, that makes sense. We're glad to have Sam back. So you're closely related to the program. Who do you think on Utah's squad, position groups or individual players, are keeping those coaches up at night while they're making their game plans?
I think it's probably the offensive tackles. Jay Savell said, one of the guys is definitely headed for the first round of the NFL draft, and the other one is probably not far behind. So they're big, they're athletic. Wyoming's defensive ends are a little bit undersized. So that's something I'll be keeping an eye on because, Utah's tackles could either dominate these guys and it'll be a long night and Dampier can, make coffee in the backfield and do whatever he wants back there. Or maybe these undersized guys can get around those big guys. But I think that's probably, their number one worry because, they're going to have to get some pressure on Dampier. They're going to have to make this, a stressful game for him on the road. And if he has all day to survey whether to run or pass, then, it's going to look like his first two games this season.
So speaking of offensive lines, it looks like Wyoming has returned 4 out of 5 starters. How do you expect them to stand up to Utah's defensive line?
Yeah, I think they need to rise to the level of play. Jack Walsh and Caden Barnett have been around a long time, the center and right guard, respectively. They're two of the, higher graded offensive linemen in the Mountain West and have been for a long time. So that interior is going to have to really, try to control things. And, they do have the experience in 2023. Wyoming went down to Texas, and Texas had some monsters on their defensive line. And Wyoming held their own. It was actually a tie game going into the fourth quarter before it kind of fell apart there. But they're going to have to play similar to that, where they rise up to the level of play against, Utah. I covered the Pac-12 with Oregon. Every year they just have nasty offensive and defensive lines. And Wyoming knows that they're going to have to get in there and mix it up with those guys. And I think they're capable. I think the two tackles are the younger guys and, the raw guys, but, they've shown flashes this year. Obviously they'll be extremely tested because Utah has a really good defensive end that's probably number 2 on the dread list behind the offensive tackles as far as, we don't need to get Caden Anderson's ribs hit again. So, those guys are capable of this, but it's a tall task. Obviously, Utah is year in, year out under Kyle Whittingham, one of the more physical teams in the country.
Yeah. So now think of if you're with the Utah's coaching staff, if you're game planning for this game against Wyoming, what do you think they need to be focused on to attack Wyoming, both offensively and defensively?
Well, I think the key for Utah is just to focus. I know that probably won't be an issue because Kyle Whittingham has played in Laramie and he's coached in Laramie, and he knows that things can get weird in Laramie if you're not on your P's and Q's. Wyoming has a history of taking down bigger teams at home, non-conference wise. Texas Tech came here 2 years ago, and, Andrew Peasley, the quarterback at the time, led Wyoming to a double over or an overtime victory. And, his post game said we took him to the deep end of the pool, and, that did not work out well for them. So, yeah, I think if Utah's not dialed in, then things could get crazy here. If they are playing at the level they did the first 2 games, then, they're probably going to be in pretty good shape.
Love to hear about things getting weird in Laramie. That's something we all know here in the Utah fan base. But it's been about 15 years since Utah has gone to Wyoming. And we have a lot of fans that are going to go through and see War Memorial Stadium. I've heard there's been some recent renovations. Can you talk a little bit about what Utah fans can expect to see from those renovations?
Yeah, the west side was really outdated. This stadium is 75 years old now. And and the construction literally went up until almost kickoff for the home opener. So it was a stressful week last week for the facilities guys and the athletic director and everyone. But it turned out great. It's beautiful on the west side now. There's a new press box. There's new suites over there. And if you can afford to go to the suites, there's 2 bars in there, and it's really a game changer because in this day and age, creating revenue is huge with the NIL. So that's going to create a lot of revenue. There's new bathrooms on the west side, new concessions, and when you have since even Josh Allen was here, there's a new football facility in the north end zone that is state of the art. I covered Oregon. It's right up there with Oregon. So with these new buildings and new suites, the sound really stays in the stadium more than it ever has. And the atmosphere at War Memorial Stadium, I would say in the last, Josh Allen got here was this full-time starter in 2016. Over these last 9 years, it's much different than in the past. It's always been a tough place to play because of the altitude, the weather, the nastiness of, some parts of the fan base. But now the atmosphere it's the best in the Mountain West by a mile. And, I know Boise State draws well and wins a lot of games, but I've been to that stadium, and it's, their seats are far away from the sidelines. This stadium, the fans are on top of the game. So it's a great atmosphere. And if Wyoming can somehow make it a fourth quarter game, that will be a factor.
Wyoming has been known in Utah as a hostile environment. So it's crazy to hear that it's gotten more hostile. We've heard Josh Allen is coming back this year for a number retirement, and that's cool to hear. But last but not least, do you have a score prediction for us?
Well, since I work for UW, I'm not going to do that. I don't think Jay Savell wants me to predict a loss, and certainly not to give Utah bulletin board material. But, I have a good feeling that Wyoming's going to be competitive in this game. Utah, I think, I personally think they could definitely win the Big 12 because, I covered a lot of Oregon games at Rice-Eccles Stadium, and I was at that 2014 game when, Mariota won the Heisman that year and Oregon played for the national championship that year. As you guys know, Utah had them beat, and then the receiver dropped the ball at the 1 yard line, and Oregon had a 99-yard touchdown essentially with an alert linebacker picking up on that early celebration. So I have a lot of respect for Kyle Whittingham and what he did in the Pac-12. It took him a couple of years, and then they just physically beat teams up. And I know that Wyoming wishes they would have won the Big 12 last year and Whittingham would have retired and went into the sunset and all that. But I know he came back because he has a big, big, big chip on his shoulder. And you can tell by the way they've started the season. But I will say this, Wyoming, because of last year, was so miserable. These guys have a big chip on their shoulder too. And a lot of their transfers came up from FCS or Division II or bad programs. And it's kind of a ragtag group that has this great chemistry. And it's kind of a similar vibe to Utah. I think that like they wear shirts around all, winter when they're lifting weights to say, this is personal. It's personal. And, last year was embarrassing for a lot of these guys. So I think they're going to punch back as best they can. And we'll see what happens. But whatever happens, I think Utah is going to have a great year. And I think Wyoming is going to be a surprise team in the Mountain West.
Absolutely. We're all very excited for this matchup, the return to Wyoming for the first time since 2015. So, Ryan, thank you so much for your time tonight. And we look forward to seeing you guys on Saturday.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate you.